My first serious boyfriend stalked me for about 5 years after I broke up with him. The reason I broke up with him is because I noticed him becoming increasingly possessive and controlling. This worried me a lot, and I was really young. He was older than me, so I decided to get out. The breakup itself was so brutal. He cried and screamed and begged. Initially after the breakup, his behavior seemed like the harmless actions of a bitter ex. Constant texting and phone calls, sending gifts to my workplace, that sort of thing. After about 6 months, when this hadn't died down, I started bumping into him on my way home from work or if I was out shopping, so I ended up just moving. I couldn't leave my job immediately, but moving house didn't make a difference anyway, and this behavior continued for a few years. His behavior became increasingly worse. I'd rather not go into detail, and the police were very reluctant to do anything. I literally moved every 6 to 9 months and changed jobs twice, but somehow he always managed to track me down. I didn't use social media, and even insisted friends of mine not take any pictures of me in case they posted them on social media. I kept my phone number within my circle of friends, but somehow he always managed to get my new number. I ended up a paranoid wreck thinking that one of my friends had betrayed me, or that my phone company had me listed in a phone book, and all other kinds of crazy thoughts. Then another year passed, and as our encounters got worse, I decided to report him to the police again. This time they actually took some action. At this stage, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat, I couldn't concentrate at work. I was a shell. About 2 months after I reported him to the police, I woke up one morning to a story in the newspaper about staff in the National Tax Office using resources improperly. My ex was the main perpetrator, using his job to access all of my information. In his job, he had access to my tax records, which meant every time I changed job, address, or phone number, he had access to the most up-to-date information. Before the court case began, he committed suicide, and I'm not ashamed to say I cried with relief. They were the worst years of my adult life. First and foremost, I met him playing D&D when I was 16. He happened to be the DM and was about 3 years older than me. Of course, we were each other's firsts for a lot of things, so there was that emotional attachment. I got along with his family well enough, even though they were religious, and I definitely was not, and his mom didn't really like me because I was, quote, corrupting her son. We dated for just under 3 years. After the first year of dating, I was basically done with him. But again, he had been my first. He wasn't a terrible boyfriend. But D&D was a large part of his life, and that's all he would ever talk about. He also had temper issues and would fly off the handle at the smallest thing, and it eventually was so bad, I was actually afraid of him. We sort of talked about marriage, and then I went off to college. On the weekends, I would come back from college and stay with him and his family. On Saturday nights, we'd play D&D, and on Sunday morning, I'd go to church, and then Sunday night, he'd take me home. Rinse and repeat for the first year of college. By the end of the year, I was definitely done with him, because I was in college and he was not really doing much with his life, and his temper was definitely still there. I didn't want to break up with him because I knew it would go badly. I stupidly pulled the whole "let's go on a break" line. He actually believed it, and was devastated when he found out I was interested in another guy on campus. He didn't actually seem crazy, until I met up with him over Thanksgiving break 3 months later to return his Xbox and to get my own stuff back. He was nearly in tears the whole time, and told me that I'd ruined his life and how horrible everything was. I really did feel bad about it, and apologized over and over again. He wouldn't let it go, though. "And the ring has been ordered," he told me. I was really upset when I went home and didn't talk to him. He tried to contact me through friends, but I wasn't having any of it. I transferred to a private college out of state for the following spring semester. My birthday was in April, and I got a text message from him on my new cell phone number wishing me a happy birthday. I didn't really think much of it, thinking that he had just accidentally been given my new number by a well-meaning friend. I didn't respond once I figured out who it was that was texting me. I came home for the summer and stayed with my mom, and I got a new boyfriend. One day I was with some old friends, and one of them asked me if I had talked to my ex lately. I told her no, I hadn't spoken to him since our hostage exchange about 6 months prior, and she was perplexed because she had heard from him that he had been driving up to my college town quite often. She just assumed that we were either fuck buddies or friends again. I was horrified. It's a 45-minute drive without traffic, so it was kind of a stretch that he'd been going there for some other reason. About a month after I found that out, it got even weirder. One morning I woke up pretty early and had a text message from him on my phone saying that he really needed to see me, and could I please just talk to him. It was sent sometime around 3 in the morning. I went upstairs and my aunt asked, "Was your boyfriend over last night?" I denied it because my new boyfriend lived about an hour away, and I wouldn't have snuck him into my mom's house. I asked her why she had asked, and she said, "Oh, because I thought I saw his car parked outside the house about 6 a.m. this morning. I didn't think anything of it, but the car was gone around 6:30 or 7. I immediately got chills and texted my ex back, asking him if by chance he had that make and model of car. He responded that he had traded in his old one for a new one that looked exactly like my boyfriend's car. I stupidly agreed to meet him after that and realized it was a very bad idea. We went out to dinner, and I made sure everyone knew where I was going and had my cell phone on me. He wasn't acting weird at first, and I was kind of surprised. He then started trying to guilt trip me again, at one point leaping up from the table and almost running to the bathroom when I answered his question about my new boyfriend and how it was none of his business if we had sex. When he got back, he apologized and said he couldn't stomach the thought of me with another guy. I asked him to take me home after we were done eating, but we drove around instead. I was terrified. He kept trying to be helpful and cheerful, but I was just done. I had him take me home, and when we got to my front door, he asked for a hug and a kiss. I hugged him, and he started trying the guilt thing again, and I just lost it. I told him off for being a creep and sitting outside the house at 3 a.m. and trying to make me feel bad, and I was just done feeling bad. I told him to go away and leave me alone. I didn't hear from him after that. He badmouthed me to all of our friends, and then dated a girl about 5 or 6 years younger than him who had just turned 18. They got engaged after only 6 months of dating, married 3 months after that, and then they had a kid last August. Fucking crazy. Started dating a guy right after I turned 18. We'll call him Steve. We ended up dating for 3 years. During that time, he was deployed to Iraq for a year and a half, and after he came back, we lived together and ended up moving to a different state together. About 5 months after we had moved, a mutual and very trusted friend told me that Steve had cheated on me multiple times just before we moved together. I confronted Steve about it, and he denied it no matter how much I told him I knew. Anyway, I ended up trying to break up with him. I say trying because it was a very long, drawn-out process. He constantly tried to win me over and said that no one would ever love me again as much as he did. He stalked me at bars and called all of my friends and family members to try to get them to persuade me to get back together with him. All the while, he was sending me text messages saying he was going to kill himself without me and he couldn't bear to live anymore. So one night after a particularly scary message, I went to see him to make sure he was doing okay. He eventually passed out, and then I called the suicide hotline and told them about his history, that he was a veteran, his suicidal messages to me, and so on. They told me to call the police, so I did. They ended up taking him to a mental hospital where he stayed for about 2 weeks. After that, we were over, and he moved back to his hometown. Fast forward about 3 years later, one of our mutual friends gets married, and I have to see him at their wedding. He was still crazy. He asked me if I would slow dance with him, kept buying my new boyfriend shots, made the whole weekend as awkward as possible. So, about 2 weeks after the wedding, I find out that he had been arrested for possession, manufacture, and distribution of child porn. And he told our mutual friend that he thought it was my fault that he got caught, because I was probably the one that ratted him out to the police. I mean, what the fuck? If I had known that, I would have done something about it 3 years earlier. While I was in class one day, I received a ton of calls, texts, and voicemails from my then ex. I ignored them and refused to be distracted because it was a midterm review session. He then found my class, threw open the classroom door, and started dragging me by the arm to leave the class. I was absolutely horrified that this scene was occurring in front of about 40 people. I resisted because I really wanted to stay in the class, and he was being crazy, irrational, and ridiculous. He finally was able to drag me out, and though the entire class was silent and watching, they did nothing to help. However, when I got outside, I told him off. When he finally left, the class was already over. After I took a long walk to cool down, I returned to my own dorm room. It was completely torn apart. My laptop was folded over its back, and its screen had been stomped on and distorted. My DS was murdered in the same manner. My mirror was cracked down the middle with blood on its broken edges. Finally, in the middle of my room were torn out pages of my diary, with drops of blood on them. Apparently, my ex had broken into my room, read my diary, and went berserk. On the pages he tore out, I had written something like, "I'm glad we broke up. I'll find someone better." Yeah, he's definitely a crazy ex. He continued doing other crazy stuff for a while. I called the police on him a few times, but they didn't do anything to help. Eventually, he graduated and disappeared. I had a boyfriend my freshman year of college, my first really serious one. So I can't even really remember exactly what I liked about him, but I was crazy over heels for him. Things were going really well until one night, another guy flirted with me on Instant Messenger while making fun of him, and he flipped out. He grabbed a tire iron with him to go find this dude. One of his buddies found him and brought him back. I was pretty shaken up, but we talked it out, and that was the first night that he told me that he loved me. Fast forward a year, and things were awful. He was always accusing me of cheating, telling me I felt different every time we would have sex. Things became physically violent, mostly on my end though, because he drove me so insanely angry, but I just couldn't get over him. One time he embarrassed me over a softball game because he was late, and I didn't put him on the roster. He called me every name in the book in front of my friends. I had to call security to get him away. He followed me home, and I had to run through the dorm screaming to get the attention of the RA because I thought he was going to kill me. My roommate actually threw him up against the wall to slow him down, so that was obviously the last straw. I talked to campus security about a no-contact order, which they said they would help with. About a week later, he followed me and hid in some bushes at a party. When I was leaving, he got out of the bushes and begged me to come talk to him, hoping I could put an end to it. I went. He told me that the reason things weren't working was because I just didn't understand him, because he was not, quote, from here. I asked him what he meant, and he told me with the straightest face that he could tell me how many people were in the buildings, and there were 3 people walking on the sidewalk a ways up. I immediately just got up and left. He pretty much left me alone after that, except the one time he broke through my dorm window and told me that he had cut the brakes on my car. He busted his hand real good, went to the hospital, and never came back to school. TLDR, I dated a guy who told me he was an alien. A few years ago, while I was still in university, I was in a serious relationship with this guy who I thought was perfect for me. My parents liked him, he got along with all of my friends, and frankly, I thought I was the luckiest girl alive. He was on his exchange semester in my city, and about 5 to 6 months into the relationship, he suggested transferring to my city. I thought that would be great, and helped him out with the application. A few months passed by, he extends his exchange semester, and we were closer than ever, even living together at that point. One day, while I was at work, a summer internship, he got accepted into my university and forwarded the email to me. I was overjoyed, and my friends were extremely thrilled as well. It felt like a fairy tale come true. We then started looking for apartments and making other arrangements for his move. A few weeks before classes were supposed to start, he flew back to his home country to visit his parents. I did the same, and we planned to come back in 2 weeks. 2 weeks later, I fly back for university, but he didn't. He tells me that his dad is really sick, and he has to stay home to take care of him for a few weeks. I didn't think much of it, but then a few weeks later, he tells me that the university emailed him and told him to join in next semester as he already missed out on a few weeks of class. I thought this was super weird, but then he forwarded me all the emails my university sent him, so I had no reason to believe he was lying. Even though he wasn't attending classes in my country, he would still come to visit me every month, which was great. A few more months pass and the next semester rolls in. He doesn't show up for the first week of class, and when I ask him about it, he says he's really sick and will fly in the following week. He sends me his flight tickets, apartment lease contract, and student visa documents, so again, I have no real reason to doubt him. The following week rolls in, and he sends me snaps of him boarding the flight. At this point, I'm super excited to see him, and I go to wait for him outside of his apartment once the flight lands. It's been an hour since the flight landed, and I don't see him pull up outside the apartment. I ask him where he is, and he says the airport isn't letting him leave because his visa had expired, and that he has to fly back to his home country. My roommate goes down to the university office to figure out why his visa expired, and they say they have no records of him as a student at my university. My ex then gets really mad over the call and says that the university lost his record even though they told him to delay his semester. He tells me to hang tight and that his dad will fly in soon to sort it all out with the university. At this point, I'm super confused, so I go to the office in his apartment to check if he had paid the deposit. Surprisingly, he did, and it was around $6,000, so I thought there would be no way that he would blow that amount of money for no reason. I believe his story and just wait for his dad to sort things out with the university. A few days pass, and I'm just sitting in my room and looking at his acceptance letter when I notice his student number looks oddly familiar. I open up my acceptance letter and realize I have the exact same student number. That's when I realized he had forged all my documents and had manipulated my friends and I into believing that he was a student at my university. I confronted him, and he said he did all of this for me and that he would find a way to be with me. Till this day, I can never trust anything a guy says to me. Many years back, I dated a man-child, relatively the same age as myself. We got along quite well. He presented himself as gentlemanly, kind, and loving. In hindsight, things escalated quite quickly. We went from being friends to being exclusive within a month, not enough time to truly know someone. This story is quite lengthy. I'll do my best to shorten it without leaving out integral details. We saw each other daily. We mostly hung out at his home. That was fine with me in the beginning, as I'm rather introverted. A couple of months into our relationship, I started to question why we weren't leaving the house, why we weren't going out and experiencing new things and trying out new hobbies. His responses were always cloudy. He always tried to redirect the conversation, thinking that I was truly stupid and couldn't tell that this was an obvious avoidance tactic. That was the point where I started to become curious, and it went downhill from there. I'm not an intrusive person, but considering he was my partner, I felt that I had a right to inquire as to why we were always isolating ourselves. After some mild questioning for a few weeks, I noticed that he began to create distance. This notable change was hard to ignore and pretty much confirmed my suspicions. However, I'm not going to make a decision based on just assumptions. I'm ashamed to admit this, but one night while he was sleeping, I went through his phone. I still feel disgusting, even though I found 100% proof that I was his side chick. I could not believe it. I still can't. I was with this person daily. It obviously confirmed why we were so confined to his home. But it was perplexing because she had no idea about me. It was about 2 a.m. when I looked through his phone. There was no way I could sleep beside him for the remainder of the morning, so I quietly got out of bed, collected my things, and went home. The next day, I believe he realized what had happened. However, he never contacted me to see why I left. Things remained silent for the entire day, and then I received a phone call later that evening. I confronted him. Again, I'm ashamed to say that I did take photos of the evidence, as I knew he would try to gaslight me. The fury in his voice was palpable. He did what a usual abuser would do, and blamed me for going through his phone while totally ignoring his infidelity. It was utterly pathetic. He created this delusion that I was going to contact the other girlfriend and tell her all of his wrongdoings, all of his infidelity, lying, cheating, etc. I would have done this. However, while I was looking through his phone, I realized that this girl was very sheltered. She was completely oblivious of what was going on. I was afraid that he would retaliate against myself and her, and I thought to myself that eventually she would find out too. I do regret not informing her. However, my decision was my decision, and I can't change that now. And this is where my nightmare begins. He was so paranoid and confident that I was going to contact his girlfriend that he would constantly call me daily and make vague threats against me. I persistently told him that I wouldn't contact her, that it was none of my business, and that she would eventually find out that he was a deceitful, inept brainworm sooner or later. All I really wanted was for him to fuck off, leave me alone, and never speak with me again. That was my only request. He obviously didn't take my kind words well, and he continued to harass me. Only a few days later, things completely erupted. His paranoia exceeded levels I've never seen before. He sent me a threatening message with the context being, "I have compromising photos of you and I'll release them," as he believed that I would ruin his relationship. I couldn't believe the delusion, no matter what I said, no matter how I phrased it. I even had my mom speak with him at one point, but it was completely useless. I sent him a message stating that if this was true, and if he messaged me again, I'm gonna call the cops. Not 5 minutes later, I received 11 messages in succession. A few were videos, photos, and personalized animations of myself. I had never seen these images or videos before. They were taken without my consent. these were extremely intimate and compromising. Unbeknownst to me, he had cameras set up around his room. These weren't just threats, these were screenshots of these images and videos uploaded on various sharing sites. Luckily, he lacked intelligence. He sent me the evidence. There was nothing I could do to stop the uploads, but I immediately went to the police. They did manage to take some down, however, there were no promises, as once a photo or video is uploaded, it could be immediately archived. This has forever altered my life. I don't see relationships the same anymore. I can't be intimate, I can't form strong bonds, I've become apathetic, I'm forensically observant, I have difficulty trusting everyone, even my family, and so much more. In conclusion, the police were rather efficient and treated me well. I was immediately granted a protection and family violence order. He broke that quite quickly and called my phone, trying his best to apologize, begging to drop the charges. He's so pathetic that he got his mommy to ring me and tried to persuade me too. Of course, I immediately called the police and they took immediate action. This ended up going to court. I won. It's not the result I wanted. However, he did get his name on that good old sex offenders registry, which is far more egregious than people may think. Nevertheless, this is beyond life-changing. To all those who have gone through this, I'm sorry, and I feel your pain. When I was younger, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder at 14. It was very difficult for me to socialize with people in person, so I turned to the internet. There, I stumbled into the world of type-based roleplay. It became my passion, and even set me on the path toward becoming the artist I am today. My original interest was Dragon Age, and I joined an RP group on DeviantArt, TMM. I loved that group, and spent all my time in the IRC chat, which naturally led to the decline in my grades. But I met Michael after I gained a bit of interest in Slenderman. I had stumbled across the blogspace RP world of Slender blogging, and followed as many as I could, dedicated a Gmail to it, and dived in, creating my own Slender blog. I played a character that was basically myself, even sharing my own name. I would even frequently post little videos of myself running through the woods, or even just talking to the camera. Michael was another player, and his character was on the enemy team. You see, I played what was known as a runner, or someone who was fleeing the Eldritch Horror, and he was playing a proxy, which is a servant of Slenderman. The kicker was that he was more than just a grunt, and was basically one of Slenderman's elite soldiers. Regardless, we ended up chatting over email, but he never broke character, so I didn't either. We continued to play with each other for over a year and a half, before I ended up breaking character to another player, who was friends with Michael as well. He, of course, immediately told Michael, "Oh my god, she's not insane," as we had all kind of thought that everyone else actually thought this stuff was real. So, Michael messaged me, excitedly announcing that I wasn't insane. We quickly became pretty close personal friends, and referred to that moment as the best moment in RP history for most of the time we knew each other. We talked on almost a daily basis, and he always seemed to go out of his way to match my schedule, even though he lived 2 hours behind me. I was a 15-year-old high school student by this point, so I was getting up at 5:30 every morning to go to school. He was pretty honest with his age, and being mature for my age, it didn't bother me that he was 19, almost 20, and I was 15. It was pretty close to the end of the year when we started talking out of character, so summer break came quickly. That just opened the door to us talking all the time. I remember one night he convinced me to stay up and video chat with him for the first time. I'd never actually seen his face before that, and I was ecstatic. I hid in my closet and we talked all night. My dad busted in at 4 in the morning and confiscated my computer, which I was not allowed to have in my room at night after that point. But I just ended up giving Michael my phone number, and we grew closer. Later, while I was spending some time at a friend's house, I told him that I didn't think he was capable of surprising me, and he responded by asking me out. Being a 15-year-old girl, I was ecstatic, but reluctant. My friend did well to ground me and think it through, and he'd been nothing if not a gentleman to me. So after a 45-minute walk with my friend, I called him and ecstatically told him yes. He had, during that time, sent me so many texts expressing his concern that he had upset me. I ended up apologizing profusely for making him wait. The first few months were amazing. We were so close and talked every night on the phone, even sleeping while still on the call. But it got weird once the school year started back up. Over the summer, I'd been able to dedicate pretty much all of my time to him, and with school, it would limit the time we could talk to each other quite a bit. It didn't occur to me at all that talking to someone for near on 18 hours a day was an unhealthy dependency issue. We had our first argument about texting. He wanted me to text him whenever I wasn't able to be on call with him, but I wasn't allowed to text in class. We came to a compromise when I told him that I would text him between classes and call him at lunch. I didn't really have any friends at that school, as I was a bit of a recluse, and the ones I did have didn't share my lunch period, so it didn't affect my social life that much. It went well for a while, until I ran into an old friend from my middle school, who happened to be a guy. I'd always gotten along better with guys than girls, but Michael freaked out. I had been on the phone when it happened, and had brushed Michael off to talk to him. After my friend and I parted ways, I was harshly told off, and told that I couldn't talk to other guys. I was completely shocked, and tried to explain that the guy had been a friend of mine. Michael then had a complete breakdown and told me that his ex had cheated on him, and that he couldn't trust any other guy to behave around me. He was terrified that I'd be stolen. He even cried. I was upset, but I agreed to mollify him, and began to avoid my male friends whenever I was on the phone, which was a lot. Quickly, schoolwork got pretty heavy, and it would take me longer and longer to call him after school. He began accusing me of not loving him enough to talk to him, and claimed that he never had enough time with me. He gave me the option of texting him in class or calling him as soon as I got home from school. I went with the latter, which completely cut off any time I spent with my family, save for a brief dinner, after which I immediately returned to my room. Things only escalated from there. I would get held after class for falling asleep because he kept me up all night, and he would explode at me for not contacting him the moment the bell was scheduled to ring. He had a written copy of my exact schedule to the minute, and any deviation would freak him out. I began pushing away all of my friends, as he didn't approve of any of them. He even claimed that a particular friend was the human personification of a demon that was trying to kill him. His mental state was revealed to be extremely fragile, and he told me in full confidence that he had a second personality, whom was quite literally his Slenderman character named Strider. Michael spoke frequently of this constant battle to keep Strider under the surface, because while he wasn't a bad person, he was irreversibly a major douchebag. He blamed his own outbursts on this character, and even texted me in italics as Strider, as if his body had been taken over for the sole purpose of belittling a 15-year-old girl over the phone. I was sympathetic, as my bipolar was at its worst, and my therapist was whispering the words schizoaffective to my mother when she thought I couldn't hear. For the next year and a half, he played me like a puppet, distracting me from my family and friends, convincing me that the teachers only wanted to turn me into a mindless tool for the government, and persuading and coercing me into performing sexually for him. It felt disgusting, but he promised me that he'd marry me and we'd have beautiful children. He was frequently abusive, but he would quickly get better, and suddenly everything would be perfect again, until it deteriorated into another explosive argument. Eventually, he convinced me to call CPS on my family and report them for abuse. Now, I won't claim that my family was perfect. My dad is an alcoholic, and he could get pretty violent, and he and I had vicious arguments. My mother mostly just supported whatever my dad did, and I was always incredibly resentful that she wouldn't defend me, even when my dad slapped me, kicked me out of the house barefoot, and was generally overly aggressive to me. But they did care, and my home was clean, warm, and well stocked with food and water. My sisters and I never really worked for much physically. We often got things we wanted too. The system would have destroyed my sisters, who were pretty young at the time. When my parents found out that I'd placed that call to CPS, I panicked and ran away from home, crashing at a friend's house. Michael wanted me to stay put until he could get a friend of his from Austin to come and get me. But when I turned on my phone in the morning to see the text from my family and knew that I had terrified my sisters and the police had been called, I arranged for my dad to bring me home. I wouldn't let him pick me up from my friend's house because I knew he would threaten to sue her parents for assisting a runaway. I served 6 months of juvenile probation and had to endure several meetings with a state-appointed therapist for falsely accusing my family of abuse, and my parents were subject to a second inquiry from CPS due to me running away. By the end, we were breaking up every other week, getting back together when he would send me pictures of terrible gouges in his arms, threatening to kill himself. I actively hated him by then, but still loved him at the same time and didn't want him to die. I finally escaped when he discovered that I'd been talking to a male friend who he particularly hated and dumped me on Valentine's Day. It took him 2 months to realize that I wasn't coming back, but he would still try to text me, and I blocked so many numbers and email accounts because he would change them just to message me. It was completely terrifying, and I was constantly scared because he knew my address, but eventually he disappeared, and I slowly started trying to put my life back together. About a year or so ago, he texted me, and I indulged him. He claimed that he'd been married. I really doubted it, despite the single picture that he sent. I asked what date his wedding had been on, but he couldn't tell me, and first tried to claim that it had been in December, 2 months before he dumped me. When I called him on it, he backpedaled and got defensive. I blocked him after that, satisfied that he was still a miserable mess and that he hadn't snared another poor minor. When I was 18, I wasn't in a good place in my life. I was into drugs, boozing, and partying. I also had some not-so-good friends. Eric was one of them. When I got kicked out of my apartment for my crazy lifestyle, he offered to let me stay with him, as long as he, quote, got something in return. Okay, I liked him anyway, so why not? At first, everything was cool, but after about a week, he started getting abusive and scary. He was a hardcore drug addict and alcoholic, and when he got mad, he got violent. I'm talking throwing liquor bottles at my head, beating me, and locking me up in rooms. Not fun. Whenever I tried to leave, he threatened to kill himself. Typical manipulative behavior, basically. I stayed, unfortunately. During this time, an old friend, the only real decent friend I had, came back into my life. Steven had always liked me, and I was happy to have someone nice to hang with, so whenever Eric was gone, I'd sneak Steven in. Pretty soon we fell in love, and I hid my relationship with him from Eric. Since Eric never really hid his infidelity from me, I didn't really care much. As Eric's behavior got worse and worse, Steven convinced me to leave him and move into his own place. Finally, I agreed. After he left for work one day, I packed up what little I had and left with Steven. I had never felt so relieved. Then the calls came. I think one of Eric and Steven's mutual friends told Eric I was living at Steven's place. First, it was mostly screaming and threatening both of us. Then it was begging me to come back. Then more screaming. I was really scared. Steven was really scared. Soon, Eric would come by our house and bang on the doors and windows, screaming drunken nonsense. We called the police once, but by the time they arrived, Eric was already gone. They said they couldn't do anything. One day, Steven received an envelope, and inside it were nude pictures of me that Eric had taken while we were together. He also taped them all to my car windows and slashed my tires in the middle of the night. Again, we called the police, but since they had no proof, they couldn't do anything. Apart from what I mentioned already, Eric also smashed our home's windows, spray-painted horrible things on our front door, tried to assault both Steven and I a few times when we tried to leave our house, turned many of my friends against me, and tried to get me fired from my job. Steven and I were now terrified. Both of us are short little things, and Eric certainly wasn't. He was, and still is, mentally unstable, and we were fearing for our lives. Since we had so many mutual friends, we felt like we could never really escape him, and he'd always find us unless we took drastic measures to prevent it. So, finally we decided to move to England, Steven's birthplace. After that, we felt so much better. We got some nasty emails, but after a while it died down, and we finally live in peace. I have heard from friends that he still holds a grudge though, but what really matters is that Steven and I have been together for nearly 2 years now and are super happy, and I'm sober and completely clean. In college, a while ago now, I got into a relationship with a guy. He was fine until he, quote, found Jesus. He quickly went crazy, claiming demons spoke to him, trying to buy weapons from some shady friends we had, fantasizing about how he would hurt people, becoming incredibly controlling and physically abusive, nearly killing me a few times. Needless to say, I GTFO'd. After a few threats and really crazy behaviors, he left me alone for a while, and I thought that was that. I was heading to my dorm after a meeting one night when I decided to go past it and go to the student union, which was right down the street, to get some ice cream. As I passed the dorm, I heard steps behind me. I turned around and thought I saw someone in a white shirt ducked behind a big signboard. I kept walking, but listening carefully. I heard something move and whipped around again. There, a person, his size, staring at me from behind a tree. I couldn't see very well, but it really looked like him. I was mildly freaked out by then, but just walked a little faster. I'd hear the occasional footsteps and breathing behind me, but I didn't dare stop or let on that I knew someone, probably him, was there. I knew he owned a gun and would likely put a bullet into me given the chance. He was that psycho and upset that I dared break up with him. I walked all the way to the union and got some ice cream and just sat there in the store eating, unwilling to go back out into the unlit street in case it was my crazy armed ex. I still hadn't mustered the nerve to head back out when my phone buzzed. My heart just about fell out of my chest when I saw the message. It was some of my friends, a sweet couple. They'd been walking way behind me when they saw something that alarmed them enough to text me. "Your ex is walking around the street." They called me before I could even text them back. "Where are you? Your ex is prowling around here near your dorm. He was coming back from the direction of the Union. I think he had a gun. Was he with you? What's going on?" Panicked, I assured them that I had not been with him, but someone who looked like him had been following me, and I was at the Union and was too scared to go back alone. They practically yelled at me to stay there and to not go anywhere, and that they were coming. A few minutes later, they came running into the Union, breathless and eyes wide, asking me why he was by my dorm and what had happened. This was possibly what scared me most of all. The boyfriend, who is a black belt in karate and is never scared, looked absolutely terrified. He was coiled into some kind of fighting stance and looking around wildly, afraid that my ex would appear with his gun. They told me they were taking me back to my dorm and calling the cops. They sandwiched me between them, and we walked back to my dorm as quickly as we dared, the boyfriend walking in front and yelling into the darkness that my ex had better not try anything. I let the two of them into my dorm and we went up to my room, where my roommates put in a frantic call to the police. As we peeked out the windows facing the street and the side of my dorm, there he was, lurking in the trees. A streetlight reflected something in his hand, something shiny. I saw him tug at the .22 I realized he was carrying, and look up. We locked eyes, and I saw something, this kind of rage in his eyes that froze me. At that moment, I knew he was really out to kill me, and my friends and I had foiled him this time. He quickly turned and ran away through the trees. We didn't know whether he would come back and try to break in or something, so we called the police again, and lo and behold, sirens within minutes and officers with guns combing the area. They caught him a few hours later, still with the .22 in hand. He confessed he was indeed going to try and kill me if he had the chance, but he didn't want to take pot shots at me with my friends there. Apparently, since I had broken up with him, I was, quote, given over to Satan, and he had a duty to make sure I died and went to hell. Of course, he went to jail and later to a mental hospital, and I moved out of that dorm a week later. I just couldn't live with the thought that he could break out and come after me again. I got some cop friends to keep an eye on my roommates until they could move out too. I was never really the same after that. I was so afraid and paranoid for years and years. Now, I can be out and about without any fear, but I still have nightmares about him staring at me through the trees, gun in hand, and rage in his eyes.